I think probably the big issue of this week was the scrap, of which I have not been a part, and I have watched and observed from afar, but this amazing scrap in Parliament as to sovereignty of the Treaty of Waitangi. Whoa. It's getting serious now. There's a line in a movie, I can't remember, so man, and it says, goes pejorative, sure, it got serious. And that is how I feel about what happened this week. It all related to an article or an interview that Christopher Hipkins, the leader of the opposition, gave with, I think, Radio Watia or one of the Maori news stations, in which he kicked the whole thing off. Well, he didn't kick it off. It's just, we look at the United States of America. This is the best way of making this analogy and saying there are Republicans and Democrats. And I remember going on a month-long study tour of the US, 30 years ago, paid for by the US Information Service. It was wonderful. In actual fact, it was best trip I've ever been on in some ways and worst in others. But nevertheless, it was at the time of the Gulf War when the US said it was at war. And because of a family relationship I had, and that person was then working for George Bush Sr., I had unparalleled access into the White House, the State Department, the Pentagon, and places like that. I was a newly minted MP, and I can tell you it infuriated Jim Bolger, who was the Prime Minister, because he couldn't get the same access that his lowly government backbencher from Hawke's Bay was getting. And it was nothing to do with my status, obviously. It was just to do with, who I knew. Anyhow, cut a long story short. One of the things that struck me, there were two things that struck me about the United States of America, and this is 30 years ago, not now, this is 30 years ago, and it really does, and I toured the country. So I won't say I went everywhere. I think I went to 10 of the 50 states. I was able to go anywhere I liked in the United States of America. The deal was I had to spend 10 days in Washington, D.C. And that was all that was imposed upon me, and get a series of lectures, conversations, discussions. Man, got a dressing down in one case, from the White House, the National Security Council, the Pentagon, State Department, a whole variety of people who were also at that time running the show, at the White House in particular. And so I had these discussions and this access. They falsely believed, this will make you laugh, but they falsely believed that there were two New Zealanders of the early 1990s who were destined to become movers and shakers, power brokers in this country. And one of them was me. Honestly, they're talking about US intelligence. And the second one, believe it or not, was Leanne Dalziel. So that all turned out so well. So they thought, there one day is the leader of one party, their day is the leader of the next. And even by then, I'd attached a rebellious reputation within the National Party, so there was no way in the world that I was ever going to lead the National Party. But it just amused me. But I wasn't going to disabuse them of that, because I was having such a good time. And I was able, as I said, to go anywhere in the United States of America on this magnificent scholarship and the generosity of the then US government. There were two things that struck me, and I can remember coming back here and going, wow. And I actually sounded a warning and said, here's the danger for New Zealand, because I realised that to a large extent, culturally, politically, even in the early 1990s, New Zealand was aping the United States of America. We were just a decade or so behind. The first was race. And one of the things that you really do not appreciate is that even today, even today, our race relations are better than the United States were in the 1990s, 1960s, and the 2020s, and probably will endure to be so. You don't really recognize or understand, certainly, the cleavage in race, the color of your skin, matters in the United States of America to this day. And you don't get an impression of that, as anybody who travels to the United States will know, until you get there. And equally, if you're white and you arrive in that country, you are equally disregarded, disrespected, instantly for the colour of your skin as well, by the black and Hispanic communities too. I can't imagine what it must be like for the Asians who arrived in the last 30 years in that country. I guess they sort of sailed serenely around it, would be the guess way of describing it. But the cleavage between Hispanic, black and white in the United States of America is extraordinary. And I warned that could happen to New Zealand. And I think 30 years later, I think with some justification, I could probably say, well, we're on the way. The second issue we've already passed, in my view. And the reason I'm raising these two contrasts is because of the speech that leader of the opposition, Chris Hipkins, gave this week, or at least the news interview that he gave. The second cleavage that I noticed in the United States of America and seemed irreparable and baffling and bewildering to me was the cleavage between people who identified as Republican and Democrat. And it was such a dividing line, even in the early 1990s, that if a Republican member daughter brought home a Democrat boyfriend, there was a good chance not only would the Democrat boyfriend not go across the front door portal, but the daughter would be disenfranchised and told that she needed to seek immediate psychiatric help for even thinking that she should have a Democrat boyfriend, and vice versa. And it's the political division in that country, the extraordinary division between what I'd call middle America, sort of rural, provincial United States of America, and between the urban elites of New York, Washington, D.C., Los Angeles, California, etc., San Francisco, Chicago, the cleavage was almost absolute. And I remember coming back and saying, God, thank God, in this country, our race relations, for whatever particular problems that they might be, are nowhere near that. But they could end up that way, just quietly. And then the second way was, thank God that a Labour Party person can talk to a National Party person in this country, and they can sit down and have a beer. They couldn't do that in the United States of America. They'd just simply glass each other after about, I was going to say 5 minutes of conversation. I don't think there would be any conversation. It was just smash bottles and we're into it. And you can see that being played out dramatically. And amplified with as many exclamation marks as you like in the United States presidential elections campaign as we're talking now. Well, and I always thought up until this week that if those two issues ever combined, race and, if you like, the clear cleavage of politics and political partisanship in this country, we'd be in trouble. Well, guess what? We're in trouble. And that's what this week is an extraordinary affirmation of. If you now have divided Parliament, three parties that are there, on the one hand, Labour, Greens and Te Pāti Māori, and on the other hand, National, New Zealand First and ACT. And there is no potential, no opportunity, no common ground now on the Treaty of Waitangi. There just isn't. You either believe that the Treaty of Waitangi, which has been a founding document of this country, that's true. It doesn't have any constitutional relevance in many ways. Well, until you give it the gift, which unfortunately previous governments, National-led and Labour, have done, of legislation to be able to turn this corpse into life. And I've always described the Treaty of Waitangi, the best way to describe the Treaty of Waitangi is it's basically a zombie. It was dead, it was in the grave, it was mouldering away, and it was recognised by a headstone. And it was fine like that, and the rest of New Zealand just got on with it. And then 1975, woof, the dead is given life. And we now have this zombie which staggered out, sort of blinking into the sunlight, not quite knowing what to do and unable to control any of its limbs. And we all thought, oh, that's all right, it's over there, it's over there, it's over there, won't come anywhere near us. Well, boy, have we been disabused of that. And this week, the Treaty of Waitangi now has become such a divisive issue. A divisive issue now that it has irrevocably split the political parties that are arraigned in Parliament. And in a way in which there is no rapprochement possible. There is no middle ground. There is no opportunity to say, whoa. And it's ironic today, in some ways, that the Maori King is dead. Because whatever his faults and whatever his particular proclivities, and he wasn't a great man, he was a figurehead at the end of the day, an individual plucked from relative obscurity into a role that really wasn't in keeping with him. But I do get the fact that he was a bit of a peacemaker, and you can even see him at the end sort of saying, listen, we need to get on. That was essentially the tenor of what he's saying. And I thought, in many ways, he could have been a lot more radical, particularly when you think that he's got Tuku Morgan and the Tainui activism behind him. But he's dead today. And it'll be interesting to see but it's another one of those voices. It's another one of those Taihoa individuals who's now shuffled off the stage permanently in this particular case. And you can now see that New Zealand and its future is going to be riven by its interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi. And there is no middle ground. You either believe, as Chris Hipkins and Willie Jackson and Te Pāti Māori and the Green Party and the Waitangi Tribunal and a whole series of university academics in this country believe, and if you like, the metropolitan elite believe, that there is no English version of the Treaty of Waitangi. There is only one treaty, it is Maori, and in that Maori treaty, it does not give sovereignty to the Crown at all. In other words, if you look at it from their point of view, there's an illegitimacy, and this is the key. This government and all governments are essentially illegitimate. Now, just think about that for a moment. If you take their interpretation of the Maori version of the treaty, or Te Tiriti o Waitangi as they call it, the English version's gone, consigned to a dustbin. It's almost like, we were yin and yang, and ying's gone. And ying's dead in the minds of these folk. Then at no stage does this government have legitimacy. And interestingly, that's an argument that's being utilised in university campuses as I talk to you now. There'll be a whole series of Maori studies lecturers and law lecturers getting up and say, I don't think this country is a legitimate country. This is a country that has seized power by way of force, put in place essentially illegitimate institutions, and is now holding sway and oppressing the indigenous and earliest inhabitants of this country on a daily basis. And we are seeing that in all these dreadful statistics, of which Maori are the top. So you've got that particular version, that perception, and then you've got the perception of what you'd call would have been mainstream New Zealand, ever since probably about 1860, I would think, to the last 10 years, that the English version of the treaty is the preeminent one. It's said that Maori concede sovereignty, and that is that government sits at the top, and then Maori and the rest of us sit underneath that government, and Maori accept that that's the government that runs their lives, and they're given special status because, well, they got here first, which is a ridiculous reason to give people special status. Whoop-de-doo, I'm sure in England they go, oh, you're an Anglo. Oh, good God, you're a Saxon. Dear Lord, you got here first. Oh, well, you've got special rights and privileges then. Oh, you're the Celts. Oh, okay, yes. Oh, you've got Pict blood, if you're in Scotland, for example. Listen, you just have special rights and privileges that nobody else should exist. It's absurd, obviously, but this is New Zealand. And so we went through this rather benign interpretation because the Treaty of Waitangi was really sort of a kid's fable, really. Oh, it's a kid's table. We all got on, signed the Treaty of Waitangi. I went round to his place. I introduced him to beer and muskets, and he had a great old time, and we gave him clothing and a written language, and we went round to their place, and we had a meal. It came out of the ground. It tasted a bit funny, but oh no, they've got this really good idea about mana and whakapapa. I quite like those concepts, stuff. And we got on really well, and we played rugby, and we got married to each other, and had kids, and everything was moving fine. It was sort of this lovely mythology of New Zealand and how the Treaty of Waitangi had created this sort of wonderful relationship between two people. But at the end of the day, our interpretation, almost everybody that's listening to me now, we grew up with this concept that the Crown ran the show and that everybody else just accepted that that was the legitimate government of this country. And not only was it the legitimate government of this country, but in any scrap between any of us, all right, in any dispute between any of us, the Crown would have the final say. That is not what Chris Hipkins said. That is not what the Greens say. That is not what the university academics say. That is not what the metropolitan elites say. That is not what the judicial activists sitting on the Court of Appeal and our Supreme Court say. They say no. That's not what the Waitangi Tribunal say. And for those of you who go, well, how did the Waitangi Tribunal inject itself into this discussion? Dreadful people. I can understand why you think that. But the simple answer to that question is because New Zealand government was stupid enough to legislate for the composition of the Treaty of Waitangi, its establishment, extend its powers, and let it arbitrate on any interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi. I didn't make this up. It's the law. And our Parliament decided to create that. So in many ways, Nash, as I said, here are the people that stand condemned. Longy Palmer, Bolger, Shipley, Clark, Key, English. And I'm not even getting to Ardern and Hipkins. I don't need to, because these are the people that created the problems for us in this country and ran away from them with this sort of, oh, don't you worry, don't, and they told basically the rest of us, there's nothing to see here, move on, all right? There's nothing to see here, move on. Well, there is. There's plenty to see. And now we are, and this week is, I think, going to be pivotal in the future of this country and in the political history of New Zealand. This week is the week in which Parliament decided that it was in permanent rift over something as fundamental as the Treaty of Waitangi. And so that's why I've given this analogy of the United States of America, an impossibly riven society, divided by race and by political outlook, sometimes by both, but unable to find any common ground, it would appear, at all. New Zealand has just entered that lexicon. We are now in that ballpark. We are now in that amusement parlour, and we have not got a map to get out. This has been a very scary